What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. Really fun episode for you this week. We've got Albert Breer from Sports Illustrated, who we love bringing in this time of year so he can empty the notebook on us as far as the draft is concerned. So we're taking a big picture view at this year's class, the talent in this year's class. How likely is it that the Patriots are actually able to trade back? Is it going to be more difficult for them than maybe we've anticipated? I know I have mocked the Patriots trading back in the first round, adding some extra picks in the middle rounds, and then making their selection late in the first. I've seen other mocks where the Patriots trade completely out of the first round entirely, and even those make some sense. But will that be tough for them to do this year? Breer answers that for us. He also gives us a few names that we need to keep an eye on from a Patriots perspective based on some of his reporting. Always fascinating there. Remember a couple of years ago, now this pick didn't work out great for the Patriots, no question, but Albert's reporting extremely solid when he told us, keep an eye out for a guy named Jawan Williams from Vanderbilt, because the Patriots, I think they've got some real interest in that guy. So when he gives us a name, we have to pay attention. So he gives us a couple that could be available to the Patriots in the first round this year at number 21 overall. We are also talking to one of my favorite under the radar prospects in this year's draft class. He's a guard out of Division II Mercer. Okay. His name is Jason Poe, but you have to listen to this interview and you have to go maybe as you're listening to it. And maybe you're watching us on YouTube, but maybe you should just open up another window and search for Jason Poe's highlights, because this guy, as far as guards are concerned, absolutely electric tape, especially when you make your way to his performance against Alabama. Okay, Mercer, Alabama, not exactly a fair fight there in terms of overall talent, but you watch what Jason Poe was able to do to future pros on that Alabama defensive line at the linebacker level, making his way down the field, blocking defensive backs. It is a thing of beauty, let me tell you. And his performance, Poe's performance, not only in that game, but at the Georgia Pro Day, where he lit it up among some unbelievable athletes, some of the best athletes, not only in this year's draft class, but in the last 20 years in the NFL draft. His performance really stood out, which tells you what a special physical specimen he is. And he could be available to the Patriots or anyone else on day 3 of this year's draft class. And I think might end up being one of the best values in this year's draft class. You stack his numbers up with Shaq Mason's in terms of how Shaq Mason tested coming out of Georgia Tech a few years ago, ends up being a 4th round pick of the Patriots. Very, very similar. You can see some of my tweets on that exact topic from a couple weeks ago at Phil A. Perry on Twitter. But we're happy to bring on Jason Poe. He tells us about his journey, about that, what is now mythical pro day that he was able to put together in Athens. So great podcast for you this week. First, listen to this fantastic interview with Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated. Here is Albert. All right, very excited now to have with us Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated. Albert, thanks for being with us on Next Pats, man. Always good to get you this time of year as we're heading into the draft.
Yeah, no question. It's a great time of year. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks. And you know what's interesting about it, Phil, is like it feels like there's so much more uncertainty than there normally is. And that's not like a great reflection on the class itself, you know, like at the top. Like normally you have like a handful of guys that are just separate from the rest. You don't have that group this year, but that does lead to, I think, a little bit more intrigue, which is great to fill shows like yours, right?
So, well, exactly. And let's start with that, because what I've heard over the course of the last few months, this is even, well before the combine, probably closer to the college football playoff, where, I start hearing like this year's draft in terms of the cream of the crop this year, it's really not that deep. But oftentimes you'll hear that, but there will be like 7, 8, 10 quote unquote blue chip guys. And then after that, from, middle of the first round to middle of the second round, it's a pretty similar type of group. It sounds like it's even less than that this year, Bert, in terms of the high end talent. But what have you heard as far as that goes? And what might that mean for the Patriots at 21 overall and maybe them trading down?
Yeah. So I think the top of the class is like significantly weaker than you normally see. Like I've heard from a couple different teams that they don't think there's a player in this year's class who would go in the top 12 last year. Now think about that. Like 12 guys in last year's class, maybe better than anybody, at least as far as their grades go coming out, than there are this year. And so I think this is a tough year to be picking in the top 5 or 10, because it's hard to find that like freak show. And so Aiden Hutchinson's a really good player, but like, are there questions about his ceiling? Kayvon Thibodeau has a high ceiling, but a low floor. Like, and then you look at the tackles, and I think the tackles are relatively safe at the top, but there are questions about them. Charles Cross, like the most natural left tackle of all of them, barely run block, barely any like evidence of him as a run blocker in college. Ike Ekwonu, is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Evan Neal, can he play left tackle in the NFL, or is he more of a right tackle? So like, I think that's what it is. Like at the very top of the class, you've got guys where it's like easy to pick them apart. What that means for a team like the Patriots means you're in a good spot. Like I felt like going into this, like when I started to turn over rocks, in December and January, you look at like where Philly is, right? Like where Philly was going into this with three first round picks and all of them sitting there in the teens, thought they were in like a relative position of strength, because that's like, you wouldn't be getting blue chippers there anyway in any year. And like the difference between maybe the 4th pick and the 14th pick isn't enormous this year. So I think the Patriots are in a good spot there at 21st overall. And I think, if you're talking about trading down, this might be a relatively tough year to trade down because of that, because I think the strength of the class is really in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. There are a lot of starters that you're going to be able to get in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. So like, I think if you're looking to trade down, you're hoping that there are runs on certain positions in front of you. And so that could mean a run on corners. It could mean a run on receivers. Like, do the 2 Ohio State kids and Drake London go off the board in the teens? Well, and now somebody's moving up to say get Treylon Burks. Like I think you'd have to have things fall a certain way so you could get value for your pick. But I think more teams are going into this year looking at it and saying we would rather accumulate picks on day 2 than have a higher pick on day 1, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And that is usually the approach that the Patriots take, right? But it makes it harder to do that if there's this groupthink around the league and everybody wants those same picks. It could be difficult to execute a trade like that. Though Bert, for Patriots fans, I think that would excite them if they just sat there at 21 and took a player that they thought could impact their team right away, maybe even play a starting role on their team right away. I think they've done a pretty good job in terms of plugging most of their holes with capable veterans at this point in the offseason. They could play a game tomorrow if they had to. Right. Guard is really the one spot that it looks like they still need a starter pretty clearly. But are there players that you've heard of that when you're talking to people around the league that just sound like Patriots to you at 21 overall? Because even though they have done pretty well to kind of spackle some of those holes on their roster, they still have plenty of needs, right? Corner, receiver, offensive tackle. I think you could make a pretty good argument for guard. There are plenty of spots that they could address there at 21.
And I'm with you. First of all, like, I think like the whole idea is like, you want to go into the draft, not having to force a need, and you don't like, it's the old saying is that, the draft is a value-based market. The free agency is a needs-based market. It's why you hear a lot of teams say, I wish free agency was after the draft. You know what I mean? So they could just go take the best players and take care of their needs after. That's why I think you have so many 30-something, like big name 30-something free agents still out there, because they're waiting for maybe some needs with some teams to shake out a little bit. There are some names that sort of stick out to me that I think would be good values where they're picking. And there's one that screams at me, and that is a corner from Washington named Trent McDuffie. Now, is he a big, long, athletic, like prototype, like Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley? He's not that. He's a little shorter. He played more zone, I think, than man in college. But you hear the way this kid just knocked his meetings out of the park. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 teams. It's every single team I've talked to has said the guy's Mensa level when it comes to explaining football, explaining what he was doing out there. You see the versatility. Again, like didn't play heavy man for a first round corner in college, but has experience having played both. So you have that versatility. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of the way that people talked about Devin McCourty, coming out of Rutgers. And so I don't know if it's a perfect comparison, like player wise, like if you line them up next to each other, maybe, I don't think McDuffie's quite as big as McCourty was coming out in 2010, but just as far as like the mental makeup, the traits, the versatility, Trent McDuffie sounds to me like a perfect Patriot, and it happens to dovetail with a very real need. Like you need a guy who can develop into a number one corner, and if you believe that McDuffie can become that, I think if he slipped to the Patriots, he might be a slam dunk at 21. So he'd be the first one. You mentioned the guard need. Zion Johnson's another one, and I think he's a guy who the league in general might be a little higher on than people on the outside know. And so I think he probably goes somewhere in the 20s. So he's another one where I think, like he's sort of in your wheelhouse where he's going to be available where you're picking in all likelihood. There's a good chance he's available where you're picking, and he fits a very real need. And so those are the two guys that really stick out. I mean, you and I have talked over the last 2 months about Chris Olave and how I think he'd be like a fantastic fit. No bias here. You guys can see, people who are watching this on video can see some of the stuff in the background that'll explain the rest of that one.
There's probably an Olave picture somewhere.
Yeah. I don't think I have any pictures of Chris up there. We got Zeke and Maurice Clarett. So
give it time. Give it time.
But I think Olave would be a really good fit. My question is, after everything they've done at receiver and trading for Devontae Parker, do they double down there? And I wouldn't be against them doing that, but you just kind of look at where their needs are and kind of what they've addressed and what they haven't. You wonder if they've sort of looked at this and said, we can wait on receiver until day 2 because we think there's some depth at that position, and we might be better served addressing guard or corner in round 1.
Well, in corner to me would make a lot of sense if you're just looking at it, as Bill Belichick, the economics major from Wesleyan, and you're saying to yourself, well, how much money can we save by having a very expensive position on our roster and a starting caliber player on our roster on a rookie contract?
Right.
The savings at corner are massive compared to the savings at, say, guard. And I can still see them taking a guard in the first round. They did it with Logan Mankins, worked out pretty well. That guy ended up being pretty damn good. But the McDuffie pick would be fascinating to me because he's not huge. Like you said, Bert, he's 5'11", 195. So he's Malcolm Butler sized, really. Yeah. But ran a really good 4.44 at the combine. And to me, I was a little bit surprised because what I had heard going into the combine was that his teammate, Kyler Gordon, was expected to blow it out of the water.
Yep.
And he has this really versatile athletic background, martial arts. I think he's done ballet before. He played all kinds of sports in high school, and he goes to Washington and he looks like this elite athlete. He just didn't test that way in Indy. And McDuffie has this versatility as well, but just what you're talking about, which is the mental side of it, that means so much. We know, and it's one of the reasons why Bill Belichick loves these Saban corners, these Saban defensive backs and guys that have been coached well. Devin McCourty, Logan Ryan, Daron Harmon, those guys from the Shiano tree who he trusts on that side of the ball as well. So that would make a ton of sense to me, if he's bringing those traits to the table that you mentioned.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting too, because you mentioned like how, and one of the reasons the defensive backs at Alabama, why Bill trusts that, is because like Nick works specifically with the defensive backs. If you go to an Alabama practice, when they go into position drills, like Nick is literally like there in the on the grass with the corners, and I like, there's some element of that with this too. Like you look at the line of defensive backs that have come out of the University of Washington, and Jimmy Lake, who just, got fired, but had been the head coach, his specialty was defensive backs. And so they developed Budda Baker, who's turned into an all-pro in Arizona. They developed Taylor Rapp, as a kind of a versatile box safety type. He's a contributor for the Super Bowl champions. I think Sidney Jones, if he hadn't been hurt, like would have become a really good corner. So that's another one where you have like a pipeline of guys coming through too, where it's not why you pick a guy, but I think it kind of gives you like a comfort level, like guys who come from this system at this specific position have been able to transition into the NFL.
I think it would also be interesting because it would also signal what it looks like the Patriots have been doing this offseason, which is preparing to play a little bit less man-to-man defense than they've played the last several years, where they're at the top of the league in terms of their man percentage. Really since Brian Flores took over for Matt Patricia, they've been right at the very top.
Right.
And if they take McDuffie, even though he can play man, and I know they still believe you have to play man in certain situations, if they're going to be more of a zone team, it feels like that would be something he would be comfortable with as well. So that's a great name for you to bring up to us, Bert. The last thing I wanted to ask you something about what you wrote about in your Monday Morning Quarterback this week, which was you talked to Rick Spielman, former general manager for the Vikings, and he's talking about how the game is changing and it's trickling up from the college level. I want to just ask you about like the defensive perspective right now that you're sensing across the league, because something that Nick Saban actually said over a year ago now, we know Saban defensive guy, right? Like, what he said was he eventually realized that in the college game, it wasn't enough to stop teams and to keep them in the teens on the scoreboard and win games that way, win at a high level that way.
Yeah.
They had to outscore other people. And I wonder if it's getting to that point in the NFL and if Bill Belichick will ever subscribe to that theory. But are you sensing, I mean, we're still seeing corners get paid, through the roof, and defensive ends still get paid through the roof, but are teams valuing defense less? Because if the college game is trickling up, that kind of feels like where it would be going.
We could do like a whole podcast on this, and I'm always long-winded, so excuse me if I go long on this one, but I mean, like, I think there's an incredibly fascinating discussion that goes all the way to like when these kids are in high school, and that all the best athletes are playing receiver now, and so that's why every year is a great receiver year. In fact, if you look at like the last 8 or 9 classes and you separate the first rounders from the second rounders and just list them, like the second rounders are, I mean, almost as good, if not as good as the first rounders are. And you've got just so many great athletes playing that position. Deebo Samuel, 25 years ago, he's a running back. That's why they can use him at running back. You know what I mean? Like, and so like, I think that's sort of what's happened. And what, Saban recognized was our pipeline. You got quarterbacks who are being taught from the time they're 5 years old and throwing 1 million balls a year. You got 7-on-7, so they're getting trained that way. And because of 7-on-7, every great athlete wants to play receiver. And there's even like a counterpoint to this. And I may have brought this up to you before, Phil. Look at the number of high-end corners in the last few years that are family of NFL people, right? So you have J.C. Horn, the son of Joe Horn. You have Patrick Surtain Jr., son of Patrick Surtain Sr., Asante Samuel Jr., son of Asante Samuel Sr. You have Molden from Washington last year. He came out, he had an NFL dad. You have this year, Derek Stingley, his grandfather's Darryl Stingley, who of course played for the Patriots in the 70s. And you know what it is, Phil, is like, it's like these kids, these parents who, have real life like experience with the NFL looking at it and saying, no, there are 200 kids like you that are 6'1", 190 pounds that run 4.4. You should go play corner, because there are only 10 kids like that. There are only 10 kids like that at that position across the country. And so I think like the evolution of the game is really, you're seeing that trickle up happen where, the receivers, like you're seeing a ton of talent at receiver. You're seeing quarterbacks who are more refined coming into the league. You're seeing NFL coaches being more willing to move towards what these guys are doing scheme wise, right? So that gives you an ability to get those players on the field and get them productive earlier because they're more comfortable with what you're doing. And it puts defenses in a more difficult position because there aren't the same athletes. Those guys are productive earlier on. You're going to have more teams that are productive on that side of the ball to begin with. And B, like if there's not the same pool of athletes on defense coming out, well, then that's an issue too. I think that's so much a part of like what Nick Saban had recognized and why that program went the way it did. It's funny because I remember talking to, a couple of scouts about this in the fall. And when Georgia was making their run, there was this question, can Georgia do it? And the reason why is because like Georgia's sort of like Alabama 1.0. You know what I mean? Like in Alabama, like they were playing the way that Nick Saban used to run Alabama, and Alabama's moved past that. Now they wind up winning the whole thing because they have a generational defense and everything else. But it's just fascinating to look at all these trends and how, in a lot of cases, like these trends are like born when these kids are 12, 13, 14 years old, playing 7-on-7, and literally in a lot of cases come down to some coach saying, you go over there, or I want to play over there. I want to be like Odell Beckham. I want to be like, I want to be like, now be like Jamar Chase. I want to be like Julio Jones. I want to play that position. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's in a very real way affected the way the NFL has done business. And we're seeing it this offseason, like you see it with the Chiefs trading Tyreek Hill, confident that they can get the receiver position filled otherwise. The Packers trading Devontae Adams, confident they can get the receiver position taken care of otherwise. It's a fascinating trend that I think we're seeing. And I think what's really most interesting about it is like all these teams are still sort of sorting it out. Like, I don't think anybody has it fully figured out quite yet.
Well, it is such an interesting transition offseason. It feels like when we're having this kind of discussion, because even though the Chiefs and Packers feel like they can move on from their star receivers and get new ones, you still have these teams on the other side that are trading for these guys and giving them huge deals,
right?
Because they feel like they're game changers and because
right.
they can't find players.
Well, Tyreek's
like that. So who's closer to the truth there, right?
Tyreek's the perfect example, because if you look at who the first receiver taken in the last few drafts has been, right? In 19, it was Hollywood Brown. In 20, it was Henry Ruggs over Jerry Jeudy, who was arguably a better player than him at Alabama, over CeeDee Lamb, right? And then last year, the second receiver taken behind Jamar Chase, who Jamar Chase may have been the best one to come out since Julio, was Jalen Waddle over his Heisman Trophy winning teammate. Now, what do Hollywood and Henry Ruggs and Jalen Waddle all have in common?
Speed. It's
right.
Speed.
Everybody's been looking for Tyreek. Everybody's looking, because since the Chiefs have been able to do what they've done, like, how do we find our own Tyreek, right? And the Dolphins are basically saying, let's just go get the real thing. And they're putting it with a guy. They're putting him now with a guy who's supposed to be the next version of him, So like it's really interesting the way that stuff is starting to work too. And you see the defensive counterpoint. Like I know, talking to coaches at the end of the year, the amount of too high shell coverage that everybody's seeing to combat that is sort of coming into play. And now we'll see how the Chiefs sort of adjust with bigger receivers, with MVS and Smith-Schuster there. It feels like that cat and mouse game has always existed in football, but it just feels like it's sort of accelerated now. You know what I mean?
Right. It does feel ratcheted up. And the reason I ask you about offense versus defense, period, is because from a Patriots point of view, I think a lot of people, and listen, I get it. It's very easy to look at what happened, not only in the playoff game against the Bills, but in the second regular season game against the Bills. You didn't stop Josh Allen once. So if they wanted to invest in defense, even if it's not necessarily what's carrying the best teams start to finish anymore, I would get it. But I also think there's a real strong argument to be made where you can't be an elite team unless you have an elite offense. And where do you get elite players? Usually it's in the first round.
So the perfect example of it to me would be like Super Bowl 54 with the Chiefs and the Niners, right? And the Niners did everything right for 3.5 quarters. Everything right. I mean, they dominated that game. Nick Bosa is going to be the MVP. It looked like they game plan circles around a really good Chiefs staff, right? And then the last 8 minutes happen, and Patrick Mahomes makes the rest of it not matter at all, And I actually think that that's an impetus for the Niners going and trading to get Trey Lance last year. The same way, I think, the way that the Rams played the year before that against the Patriots, right? And that Super Bowl where they coached their nuts off. The Rams, Wade Phillips, and Sean McVay, the defensive game plan they put together was incredible. And they got the game to the fourth quarter where it was 3-3, even with a quarterback that we eventually found out they thought was deficient in Jared Goff, and Tom Brady made it not matter. You don't think that has an effect on we need to be able to at the end of a game, go blow for blow with a heavyweight. And so I think that so much of it's that too, is that like the great quarterbacks now, it's almost like they're erasers. Like, and that Chiefs Bills game, all anybody remembers is the last like 3 minutes of regulation and overtime. And it almost seems like that's all that matters,
Right.
And so like, I'm with you on that. Like, I think that there's like a very real thing there that teams have to sort through in the way that they build, in that like we can put together a really sound team that can play 57 minutes with the Chiefs or the Bills, or maybe eventually the Chargers get there. But can we hang with them in the last 3 minutes? And I think it's like a really interesting thing to look at, because I do think it like sort of informs some of the moves that you've seen at quarterback the last few years, and now some of the moves that you're seeing with receivers.
Totally. Explosive plays, right? If you can't go down the field in 90 seconds and score to win a game, you might not be able to beat the best teams in the league. And I actually asked Bill Belichick at the start of this past season about that Saban quote, where defense just has become not as important anymore. And he said, well, we won a Super Bowl a couple of years ago, giving up only 3 points, which is true. And that's a great argument for why defense can matter, but it also might ignore the fact that the Patriots did score basically an average of 30 points in the 2 playoff games leading up to that Super Bowl. So without a very good offense with a Hall of Fame quarterback and a Hall of Fame tight end and Julian Edelman, you don't get to that last game.
I think that's such a key point too, because like, obviously the game before that was the overtime game in Kansas City. And that was the second time that year, if I remember right, like where Brady Mahomes really went toe to toe, right? Like Mahomes brought them back in Foxborough, and like that was a fantastic game. And like that to me was like the night that I really bought in. Like Patrick, like this guy's a dude, And like I think like so much of it isn't just the one-off. It's like if you're in the AFC right now, right, and you're looking at it for the next 10 years. Again, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence is generational as a prospect. We'll see what he becomes. Patrick Mahomes, like all these guys, Justin Herbert, like all these guys are, 26 and younger. You're going to be dealing with them for the next 10 years. So it's not just, can we win one game? It's like, can we win 2 or 3 against these teams in a row? And maybe you get lucky and it's snowing sideways for one of those games, right? But then if you have to come back the next week and play another one of them, well, now do you have a problem? And then whoever comes out of the NFC, like probably is going to have one too, right? Like, so I think that's a huge part of it is like for so long, I think the way the Patriots built was we need to be able to win different styles of fights, right? Like, and I think it was such an incredibly intelligent way of building a team, because when you get to the playoffs, you do have to win different styles of fights, right? And now it's like that one specific style of fight is very difficult to win. And you look at the makeup of, the league now, and there's chances are you may have to win 2 or 3 of that style of fight in a row to win a Super Bowl.
And I think the Patriots have acknowledged a little bit already this offseason that the game is changing and the kinds of players that you need matter. And, the Devontae Parker trade is part of that. Getting a little bit smaller at linebacker is part of that. Getting another safety, to play at that linebacker level is part of that. So they are adjusting, I think. It'll be interesting to see if we see more adjustments from them and them sort of maybe veer in some different ways than we're used to seeing them go in this year's draft. Albert Breer, we've kept you much longer than we anticipated, but we love talking to you about this stuff. We could talk about it for hours. I really appreciate you, buddy. Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated. Thanks for being with us on Expats.
Always a pleasure, Phil. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you once again to Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated, for being with us. You get Albert and I together and we start talking about nerdy football topics, the kinds of topics that we love discussing here on Expats. And the next thing you know, who knows, multiple hours could have flown by if we didn't put a stop to that thing. But fascinating conversation, as it always is, with Albert. Trent McDuffie, very interesting name for us to discuss, especially with, mentioned it in the conversation, but especially with the Patriots potentially changing the way they cover. If they're more open to being a versatile defense, skewing a lot more towards zone than they have in years past, still wanting to play man occasionally, but skewing more towards being a zone team, having a versatile player like McDuffie, even though he's a little undersized, he doesn't have the length to be that prototypical press man corner a la Stephon Gilmore. But with the intelligence that he has, the tackling ability that he has, the competitiveness, the aggressiveness that the Patriots are looking for, just because they might be playing more zone does not necessarily mean they want to change their mentality in the secondary. I think they still want some dogs there, and McDuffie gives them that, but he also gives them the kind of feel and football IQ that you might be looking for if, for instance, you're playing more cover 3 this year with Devin McCourty as your post safety, as opposed to cover 1, which is really what they've majored in the last several years. So that's a fascinating pick to me. If the Patriots were to go that way, maybe we're able to wedge McDuffie into a mock draft at some point here in the near future. Albert mentioning a guard as well, and Zion Johnson, clearly a Patriots fit on a lot of different levels in terms of addressing what you could argue is their greatest need right now. If they needed a starter at any position right this second, it would be at guard. And so that would make a lot of sense there, but a smart player out of Davidson for a couple of years before he transfers to BC, becomes one of their leaders, one of their best players. I think the Patriots would be more than open to using their pick on somebody that they felt like could come in and play an immediate starting role for them. We know in the first round, people don't want to acknowledge this typically with Bill Belichick for some reason, but go back and look at his first round picks. Just about every single one fit what was at the time, if not their most dire need, among their top 2 or 3. Even at running back with Sony Michel, they moved on from LeGarrette Blount. They didn't necessarily have a first and second down guy. They go and they draft a running back in the first round. We could argue the merits of that and whether that pick worked out or not. I certainly have with Tom Curran and others, but they draft for need, especially early. Even the Nate Solder pick, which I think is the one that you could argue they really didn't need a tackle at that point in time, but they ended up needing a tackle. Nate Solder, go back and look at Nate Solder's rookie year. Played a lot of football for them that year, even with Sebastian Vollmer and Matt Light on the roster. And then Matt Light ends up moving on the very next season. Nate Solder's your guy for the foreseeable future. I could see the Patriots going tackle in the first round there too. But again, back to the guards. Let's try to make this transition a smooth one, Phil. Okay. We've got a guard with us on this week's episode of the Next Pats podcast. It's Mercer's Jason Poe. Again, now's the time. Go find the Jason Poe highlights on YouTube. Mercer, Jason Poe. If you can even figure out a way to isolate even just that Alabama game, go ahead and do that. Keep it on a loop and listen to Jason Poe get into his journey to the NFL with us right now. All right, very excited to have now with us the guy who authored one of the most entertaining highlight clips that I've seen all pre-draft process here in 2022. It's Mercer guard, Jason Poe. Jason, thanks so much for being with us, man.
Yes, sir, man. Thank you for having me on, man.
It's been a lot of fun just watching your stuff, Jason, but also finding out a little bit more about your story. And I said, if we could get Jason on the podcast, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it as well. But I have to, if they haven't heard yet, I have to tell them and kind of break down for them exactly what it is that you did at your pro day, which I think has you on a lot of people's radars now. So this is what was reported by NFL Network. Jason Poe checks in at 6'1", 300 pounds, 4'9", 40, 34 reps on the bench at 225 pounds, over 30 inches, 31 and a half inch vertical, 9'3" broad jump, but just ridiculous speed and athleticism and strength. Throw that in there as well, especially for a man your size, Jason. So how does a guy from Mercer go to the Georgia Pro Day and look like he is, if not right on the level with these Georgia athletes, even better in a lot of respects? How'd that happen?
And I just went in there with a level head, man. I was confident, coming from a smaller school, you got to have that chip on your shoulder. So, and then I just focused on God, man. So that was the main thing, just keeping him by my side and, staying focused.
How confident were you going into that environment, Jason? Because you're there with the big boys, so to speak, right? And the entire NFL is there watching. That is a huge stage for somebody who, like you said, has played at a smaller program. So how much confidence did you have going in? And did you have to do much to try to keep your nerves and your emotions at a certain level where you could perform the way you did?
I would say the day before, I couldn't really sleep. That really got my nerves more than anything. But when I stepped into the environment, man, I just locked in because it's just like a game. So that's what I treat it as. But then I had my boy Devontae Wyatt. I went to Hutch with him, so I knew him for a long time, and then Jamari Sawyer. So I knew those two guys. When I saw them, I was like, yeah, man, just feel like I'm back at home.
When you say Hutchinson Community College, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that's sort of where the collegiate journey started for you. I know you're from Georgia, but you end up at Lenoir-Rhyne as well, which is a school that we're familiar with up here in Boston because of Kyle Duggar. Kyle Duggar comes in the second round, to the Patriots a couple of years ago, coming out of Lenoir-Rhyne. So you're such a great athlete, clearly, Jason, and yet you have these unbelievable plays on your tape. Tell us about how you got to Hutchinson and then how things progressed from there, where you ended up at Mercer.
Okay, so I'm from Fitzgerald, Georgia, obviously, South Georgia, small town. I was only like 6'1", 225, 230 coming out of high school. So and guard wasn't an option, coming out because I was so small. So you either have to be 270 or 280, 6'1", or 6'1", 300, something like that, or 6'5". So that cut me short with guard. So I went to play fullback at Hut. So because my size, that was perfect. So I was all conference fullback. I had to learn the terminology and stuff. That was the toughest thing, but I did it before, the first game. And then I went to Lenoir-Rhyne University for 2 years. I was All-American there. Played guard, right guard. And then I was like 245, 250. And then for my last year, I went to Mercer University, and I was 6'1", 300.
That's unbelievable. So how do you put on that kind of mass? I'm sure part of it is just, you're still growing when you move from college to Hutchinson initially, but how difficult has it been for you to put on that size over time?
It wasn't that bad when I, got older, that heavyweight coming in. During the COVID season, people was freaking out and panicking, man. I was just lifting and grinding and eating good, man, and whey protein. So that's what I was doing.
Well, so you're at, 6'1", 300 now. So, 6'1", people may consider you undersized to a degree, but there's clearly a lot of power there on your tape to go with the athleticism. And to me, it stands out the most when you're going up against Alabama. Mercer had the opportunity to play Alabama, so you're going against the best of the best there. Tell me about that experience playing against those guys and how you felt leaving that game. It had to have been a real confidence boost for you, Jason.
Well, yeah, going into, Alabama, man, it was great, man. Great players. You got first round, second round, third round draft picks, and going against, Will Anderson, Fieldren Davis, and all those guys, and Toto linebacker. So seeing myself competing against those guys, man, it gave me, a lot of confidence. I always had confidence, but, I always wanted to play versus the best. And if I'm going to do it, Alabama was the best choice. So that was one of the reasons why I transferred up for that game.
That's a great call on your part. Like that doesn't even come into my mind when, you're talking about transferring and moving schools, but that was smart. So you saw them on the schedule and you said, hey, if I have the opportunity to be in that spotlight, that's something that I want.
Yes, sir.
You have to tell me about, there's one block that I noticed in particular in that Alabama game where you're down the field. You must be 10 or 15 yards down the field, but you get your guy on the ground. And then I'm pretty sure in celebration, we see both hands go up over your head. Like it's rare when you see a guy that fired up about a block that he's actually like, hell yeah. And we can see the emotion come out. Did I have that right? Is that what was going on in that moment? Tell us about that play.
Yes, sir. So the guy in front of me who was going back and forth, he was family fire. He came up the ball, he hit me in the mouth, I hit him back, and then it was like a screen. So I snatched him off, and he got off balance, and I just went out, 10 to 15 yards, and I seen the first guy, and I just blew him up, man. It just felt great, man. Going out there and showing what I can do.
Jason, what have you heard from the NFL, especially since your pro day? I know there are places like a friend of ours, friend of the podcast, Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus, who runs their draft coverage. I know is a big fan of yours and was a big fan of your tape even before your pro day. But when you put up those kinds of numbers on that stage, again, I know there's buzz in the league about you now. Have you heard much from the league, and what's the process been like since that day where you seem to be showing up on everybody's radar?
The process is going good, man. I'm just taking one day at a time. Things coming and going. I'm just keeping that on the side right now. But I got some stuff lined up, man, and I'm just ready to keep showing what I can do.
Have you noticed that the interest has ratcheted up a little bit? How often are you hearing from teams?
I'm hearing from often, and it's ramping up more because before they were saying like, oh, he's 6'1", 300. Like, can he really do this stuff? Because I was really telling the other interviewers and the freak list people, Bruce Feldman, I was telling them that I can do these numbers, and so for me to actually go out there and live that hype, it was a really good thing, So that buzz, it just kept coming. So like this guy's legit.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to us because when I watch you play, Jason, and I tweeted out some numbers later, you stack up physically very similarly to this guy. It's Shaq Mason. Has had a long, excellent professional career here. The Patriots just traded him to Tampa Bay, but for a long time has been viewed as one of the better guards in the league. I think he's listed at 6'2". I'm not sure he even gets quite to 6'2", Jason, but he's right around 300 pounds. And when you look at you guys in terms of your testing, it's there almost, number for number, almost, mirror images of each other, the things that you guys did pre-draft. Did you watch, or have you watched much Shaq Mason as you've been on your football journey here? And who are some of the guys that you like to try to model your game after?
Yes, sir. A lot of people was telling me about this guy, Shaq Mason. So, I took the time out and actually watched him. I was like, yeah, man, this guy plays hard and physical like me. And then so after that, I just keep watching him, and I hope he, continue to do a great job. And another guy that I would say that I actually, I model is Quentin Nelson. Obviously, he's a great guy. The way he pulls, and I was like, man, I really don't see that often, and I feel like I play like him.
He's got a certain play demeanor that is admirable, and I'm sure other offensive linemen like yourself have to love it. Tell us about your mentality, Jason. We're talking to you now. Pretty soft-spoken guy, mellow guy, friendly guy. But when you're pulling and you're on the move and you get a chance to really get ahead of steam and blow somebody up, what's going on in your mind leading to that point in time where there's going to be a violent interaction?
I just think about it as, man, it's food on the table, and that guy's trying to take it away from me, and I can't let that happen. So if I don't let that happen, man, it's going to be a good day. So I just go in and give it everything I got and blow them up. Sometimes, it's not a knockout shot, but they eventually feel it, over time.
Jason, last thing I want to ask you is just, you're on your way now, right? And we'll see how things play out for you draft weekend. I'm excited to see how it goes for you now feeling like, I've had a chance to understand your story a little bit better. At what point in time did the NFL dream start to feel like it was within reach? Because again, you're your guy playing at Lenoir-Rhyne, Division II Lenoir-Rhyne, then he's on to Mercer. But was there a point in time where you felt like, hey, this is really going to be possible for me now? Because for me and for a lot of us, it probably was that pro day, but for you, I imagine it was a little bit earlier. So tell us when you felt like this thing was something that could actually happen for you.
I would say after my sophomore year when I got All-American at Lenoir-Rhyne. So I was kind of smaller, but they were still, my tape jumped off the screen. So if you ever get a chance, you can go back and look at the Lenoir-Rhyne highlights. And then going into my junior year, I had another All-American season. I was doing great. So I think, I was getting some buzz then. So I think that's where it came from, my dream.
What's in the water there at Lenoir-Rhyne, or that conference that you guys have there? Because it's not, Kyle Duggar's a special athlete. You're a special athlete. I know Lenoir-Rhyne is a receiver coming out this year. Sounds like he's a pretty special athlete as well. What are you guys doing over there, Jason? That there are so many NFL caliber athletes at these smaller programs.
Man, only thing I can say, man, is God. Man, he's the only reason, and he's the only way, man. Other than that, him and working hard every day, and not letting another man outwork you.
Well, Jason Poe, great to talk to you. Good luck with everything as you prepare for the draft. You're still waking up at 4:30 in the morning to get your lifts in. Is that right?
Yes, sir, I am. Every single day.
Well, good for you. Even with the pro day in your rear view, no taking a breather for Jason Poe. Really excited to see where things go for you from here. Jason, thanks so much for being with us on the Next Pats podcast, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
There you have it, Jason Poe. Now you can say when he ends up moving on to doing big things in the NFL that you heard his name here first on the Next Pats podcast. If you haven't, if it's far from the first time you've heard his name, it means you are all over this draft class, and I love you and I appreciate you for it. Who knows? Maybe we end up seeing Jason Poe in Foxborough in the near future. That'd be a lot of fun. All right. I want to tell you to head on over to NBCSportsBoston.com. And if you haven't seen it already, go check out our most recent 7-round Patriots specific mock draft. I'm going to give you the picks right now and just a 1-line description of each. And I want you to throw us a comment in our rating section on Apple Podcasts and just let me know how dumb you think I am. Is this the worst mock draft you've ever heard of? Is it the worst mock draft that you could even conjure up in your own mind when you're trying to make the picks as bad as humanly possible? I'm kidding. I actually think this is a pretty good haul for the Patriots in my humble opinion, but you tell me what you think. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you love it? Do you hope the Patriots end up with some of these players? Are there other selections that you had wished you'd seen made in this 7-round mock? We'll have a bunch more mock drafts. We'll actually have a fan-generated mock, sort of our crowdsourced mock that we do every year around this time of year. So if you're listening to this podcast, we're publishing this thing on Wednesday afternoon, April 13th. By the end of this week, we will have on Twitter, on my Twitter page, we'll have polls, a series of polls where you can make a selection for the Patriots. And we will have 4 options for each pick in the draft that the Patriots currently have. And we'll just go off of whoever wins that given poll. So we'll have a poll at number 21 overall. And we may have Trevor Penning up there. We may have Bernard Raymond up there. We may have Trent McDuffie up there. And we may have Kaiir Elam up there. And the people get to decide who should the Patriots pick at 21 overall. And then we go from there. We'll use our Pro Football Focus mock draft simulator to help us out in terms of the order and who's actually available at some of those different spots. But it's always a lot of fun every single year to just try to gauge where the fans stand and what the fans hope the Patriots do with each of their picks. So that'll be coming later this week. Keep an eye out for that. Here are some of the picks from the 7-round mock. You can find the entire thing on NBCSportsBoston.com. First round, 21 overall, it's Bernard Raymond, offensive tackle, Central Michigan. He is the Austrian Sebastian Vollmer. Raw, former tight end, as Vollmer was, only 2 years at tackle, straight out of Steinbrunn, Austria, but an elite athlete, as Sebastian Vollmer was. And I think could be your left tackle of the future. We know Vollmer ended up playing right tackle. He played left tackle as well, and he would have been totally capable on that side, ended up fitting in on the right side. The Patriots need some tackle depth. Ryman is the pick at 21 overall. Second round, number 54 overall, we've got Christian Watson, receiver out of North Dakota State, headed to Foxborough at a very strong Senior Bowl week. Smaller school prospect, good Senior Bowl week, elite athlete. Sound like Kyle Duggar at all? I've been calling him the offensive version of Kyle Duggar in this year's draft class. 4'3", 640 at 6'4", 204. Special athlete. Patriots can't pass on him where he fell to them at 54 overall. So they still need a guard. They still need a corner. Where do they go with this 3rd round pick, number 85 overall? They go with Marcus Jones, corner out of Houston. Only 5'8", 174. So well below their standard thresholds at that position. But this guy is versatile. He is athletic. His acceleration is special. You can see it in his work as a returner. He was the best returner in college football last year. Competitive as all get out. I think he could be your slot corner of the future. But in the here and now, you team him up with Jonathan Jones. Now all of a sudden you have 2 water bug types to run with the 2 water bug types that Miami has in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So I think Marcus Jones, the versatility there, he even played some receiver at Houston. So maybe try him on the offensive side. We know Bill Belichick's not beyond doing that. Really good fit for the Patriots. 4th round, number 127 overall, Jelani Woods out of Virginia. Freaky height, weight, speed prospect. Again, a little bit raw and new to the position, but 6'7", 253, ran a 4.61 40, sub 7-second 3-cone drill, 37.5-inch vertical. All of this special movement skills for somebody that size. Converted high school quarterback as well, which Bill Belichick would love. All right, here we go to the 5th round. Punter Matt Araiza. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Again, throw us a comment. Let us know. Out of San Diego State. I'll just read you the brief top of the blurb that I wrote up for the website. Here are the facts. The Patriots love left-footed punters. The Patriots love to draft special teamers in the 5th round. The Patriots love a good deal, and they are scheduled to pay Jake Bailey more in base salary this year than any other punter. And finally, the left-footed Araiza just posted one of the best punting seasons in the history of college football. Now, this guy loves to hit the driver. Okay. He's got a couple of 80-yard punts on his resume. He's got a bunch of 60-yard punts on his resume. He can drill it. Does he have the kind of touch that you're looking for when you're in opponent territory and you're trying to play that field position game? Maybe not. But if he can almost guarantee you a touchback on 80% of his punts, there's real value there in Araiza as a field flipper. So just something to keep in mind. Had to get him in on a mock eventually here. Patriots still need an offensive line. They still need a guard. I don't know if Ryman can be a guard. So he's your tackle of the future. What are they doing at guard? At 5th round, I have him taking Alec Lindstrom out of Boston College. Really smart, really efficient mover at 6'3", about 300 pounds. Really only played center at BC. And so he would give you, if he can play guard, which I think he could, because he has that much ability in terms of his understanding of concepts, he would give you that versatility that you lost with Ted Karras at that center/guard spot. So I think that would make a lot of sense. I have the Patriots doubling up on the interior offensive line. Dawson Deaton out of Texas Tech, really good athlete. He actually tested similarly to Joe Thuney, who the Patriots took in the 3rd round back in 2016. 6th round pick here. Not a bad way to go. He's got a little bit more strength than I think his frame would tell you he does. 2-year captain, good performance at the Shrine Bowl. Feels like a really solid day 3 pick. And then for my last pick, we have them going with a Rutgers guy, a Greg Schiano guy. Now that he's back in Piscataway, we have to start considering more of these Rutgers players. This one is Isaiah Pacheco, running back out of Rutgers. Big bodied guy. Okay, about 215 pounds. He is similarly built to someone like Damian Harris. He also ran a 4.37 40 at this year's combine, one of the fastest running backs in Indy this year. He was a captain for the Scarlet Knights, so he checks a lot of different boxes for the Patriots. And again, when we're talking about friends of Bill Belichick, whether it's Nick Saban, Greg Schiano, Kirby Smart, we could be talking about Brett Bielema, who is now at Illinois. We could be talking about Jed Fish, who's now at Arizona. Odds are Patriots are going to be taking a player who at some point played for one of Bill Belichick's good buddies. And so this feels like a Patriots pick to me. Okay, so there's your 7-round mock. Let me know what you thought. All right, this was a lot of fun. We've got a couple weeks before the draft itself, which will also be a lot of fun. Thanks for sticking with us as you get ready for this year's draft. My favorite time of year. Will be coming at you with podcasts the next couple of weeks. We've got really one more before we get to draft week. So we'll have a great episode for you next week, middle of the week. And then we'll hit you with a mock draft episode with myself. DJ Bean is going to join us, resident draft Nick at NBC Sports Boston, Tom Curran as well. Of course, we're going to be able to tape that thing in studio. So if you're a YouTube watcher of the Next Pats podcast, we appreciate you. We will have some high-end production for you that week, the week of the draft, where we go through a first-round mock. I'll even fill in with some picks for rounds 2 through 7 as well on the back end of that thing. But that's always fun when I'm able to go through with Curran, with DJ, try to put ourselves in the shoes of the teams that are making the selections and get all the way to pick number 21 and see what's available to the Patriots and try to talk it out. What might they do? So that'll be a blast. That'll be a couple weeks from now. Again, we've got one more episode before that, but keep it locked with Next Pats. We've got you covered all the way up to the draft and then, of course, through the draft. So please rate, comment, subscribe. We'll talk to you very, very soon.